Are you the fanatic we're looking for? Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is the only interactive and dynamic mock draft simulator. Dynamic means that the picks from one mock draft will influence the players that team selects in the next mock draft. This can be done with a first-round challenge. This can be done with a second-round challenge. This will be done with any mock draft from the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has rank players functionality, allowing you to rank players and build your own big board and then compare your board to that of other users at the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has draft a team functionality. This allows 2 or more users to snake draft a team of 22 players from the rookie pool, and then you can debate which players you like at which position and why. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I am joined by Parker and Bill. Happy New Year, everybody. Parker, how you doing?
I'm living the dream, man. I'm just happy to be here talking some college football, some prospects. We are getting ever so closer to the draft. We're finally in week 18 of the NFL season. Now we can get all that garbage out of the way. We get to the real thing that people care about. Right, Bill? The NFL draft.
Absolutely, Parker. You're spot on with it. Getting to spend New Year's Eve with you guys, talking DBs tonight and getting into some ball hawk breakdown as, you know, the college football playoff game goes on. We appreciate all of you that are watching and spending your time with us instead of the Penn State and Boise State game. I promise this will probably be significantly more entertaining than that one. I hope.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. But before we dive in, let's tidy up with a little housekeeping. So first thing, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, and you hit that bell, turn on the notifications. Here at the Draft Professor and NFL Draft Fanatic, we have daily draft content just like this, scouting reports on players. Next week is our pride and joy, #quarterbacks week, where we talk nothing but signal callers all week long. In addition to that, you can find us all on X. You can find Parker at ParkerBlake60. You can find Jim at NFL Draft Fanatic. There is no I in Fanatic. You can find me at Spark Scouting, all on X, where we're always talking NFL draft prospects. But with that said, Jim, the floor is yours to kick off the show on this New Year's Eve.
Fantastic. So thank you for everybody that is watching. And this is a pretty good beginning on New Year's Eve. So I can see that there's a lot of you out there. So like Bill said, hit that subscribe, hit that like, and we're going to start talking about some DBs. So I believe this is the 4th or 5th defensive back episode, and we have one more. So if the players you wanted to hear about, if they're not in this episode, go to the YouTube channel. We've probably covered them. Or if they're not there, they're going to be the ones that we're going to be covering on our final defensive back episode a couple weeks from now. But the first player we're going to cover today is safety LaMiles Brooks from Georgia Tech. So, Bill, you want to kick this one off?
Absolutely. So LaMiles Brooks, Georgia Tech safety, 6'2", 200. I've seen differing reports on his height. I've seen 6 foot. I've seen 5'11". I've seen 6'2". So that's one box that I'll want to make sure that we check as we move through the draft cycle is what his measurements come out. But this guy is physical, and he is just a very well-built guy, whether he's 6'2", 6'1", 5'11". It's a stout 200 pounds. He also really excels in press coverage situations for a safety. He has no problems mixing it up with safeties, getting up in their face. He's a very solid tackler in the open field. He's not afraid to come up on the line, not afraid to hit you hard in the box. That's what this type of safety is. He's also got very good work ethic and very good leadership skills. He's a senior leader on that Georgia Tech team. He has a reputation in speaking with some of my contacts down in the Atlanta area about LaMiles this past week. He's got a reputation about him. He's very tough. He's vocal. He's competitive. He holds his teammates to a much higher standard than even the coaching staff does. So that's a definite big green flag for me. Looking at the flip side of the coin for LaMiles, his lateral agility, he's got solid speed, but there are some struggles going sideline to sideline with him. He's not the fastest guy in the world. In addition to that, he has good ball skills, but they're not the best. The biggest issue I've seen is he gets caught in transition during contested catch situations, especially in terms of losing the ball while it's in the air, which is going to lead to a lot of defensive pass interferences for him as a safety. There have been some injury concerns in the past with him, particularly related to lower body injuries, so leg, ankle, some foot injuries. I don't think it's a concern, but it is out there. It is something that's going to be brought up at the combine when he's asked about it. For me, LaMiles is right around that round 4 to 5 range as far as safeties go. Reminds me a lot of Justin Simmons for the Denver Broncos, a very physical safety who can play some slot nickel coverage for you with some man coverage skills. His home is as the center field roamer, but he doesn't necessarily have that sideline to sideline speed. Parker, I know we were talking before the episode kicked off, and you weren't able to find a whole lot on LaMiles Brooks, but was there anything that you saw that stood out in the little bit you were able to see on him?
I think just the biggest thing for me is these bigger safeties that are going to be the 200 plus range guys that are going to hopefully be your more physical safeties in this class. I feel like they're going to just have to do a lot more as far as showing off their agility or twitchiness throughout the process, whether that's the Senior Bowl or the Combine or whatever opportunities they're able to have, just because I feel like with just the athletic ceiling in this class and the safety class that I've started to become a really big fan of, what I've noticed with these bigger bodied guys is just they feel more like linebackers, not like safeties to me. Mm-hmm. A lot of the guys that, are flex guys, I feel like fall into that linebacker category for me. And I feel like Brooks is kind of on that same trajectory. We'll obviously I just need to get my hands on some better all-22, but I'm interested to see what his film looks like.
Yeah, so a couple questions on that, Parker, because that actually brings up a good point. What do you think is the size threshold for a safety versus a linebacker? Like, is there a prototypical size where you say if you're at this or you exceed this, that you're going to be more big linebacker or big nickel? Like, is it based upon size or is it based on something else?
I feel like for me, determining where kind of these flex safeties land is more about play style. Like if you're a solid tackler, you're a physical downhill player, you're able to fit the run well, you're checking off all those boxes, but then you get into coverage and then you lack that closing speed, in the wide open spaces. Maybe you're not a great open field tackler, but you're a great run stuffer in the box. Just kind of like those differences is kind of where I'll start to lean linebacker. For me, the size can be a lot more similar than I feel like a lot of other people feel. For me, I like a bigger safety. I like bigger defensive backs. I feel like I've talked about that through this series. Mm-hmm. I like the size, I like the length, I like the physicality on the back end of my defenses. But when you turn into a linebacker, when you start becoming a less fluid mover, you're not as agile. You can't cover the ground that the safeties need to. Though you can have great closing speed as a linebacker, that's going to look a lot different as a safety. Those are really the two big things that I look at as far as, is this guy a flex guy or is he actually just a linebacker that's been playing safety in college?
Okay. Next player, Billy Bowman from Oklahoma. Bill.
Yeah, so Billy Bowman from Oklahoma, we're talking 5'10", 200 pounds. The big thing that really popped for me was his ball skills and his anticipation. I really think that was probably a good thing for me that I saw on his tape. He also is a very, very versatile defender. This is a guy that can play multiple parts of the field. He can play in the secondary. He can play in the safety. He can play in the nickel. He can do a multitude of different things. He's also very fluid with his hips and his transition. It's very smooth. But I think the biggest thing that I love about what Billy Bowman does is he's got this aggressive mindset. He is one of those DBs that we hear about all the time. See ball, get ball. He just goes after it hard. He also has special teams experience and production, so he can add that additional layer. The biggest knock on him is he is going to be around that 5'10", 200 pound. I've seen even in some cases a little lighter at 190, 195. So matching up with those tight ends is going to be a little bit of an issue for him. he is over aggressive sometimes. So that aggressive mindset that he has sometimes comes back to bite him in the butt. And especially when it comes to play fakes and play action and double moves in pursuit, he gets caught, especially in zone coverage. There's just these occasional lapses. He just loses track of people. He just turns around and people are just gone. All that being said, this is a guy that's right in that early part of day 3 range, that round 4 range. Reminds me a little bit of a diet Antoine Winfield Jr. in the fact that he can do a lot of the same things that Antoine Winfield does, but there are some issues. Winfield was much better in zone coverage than Billy Bowman is, so that's something that I'd want to see him work on. But Parker, what do you have on Billy Bowman, and what do you think about him?
No, you hit it right on the head. I think the biggest issue I have with this game is his closing speed and that ranginess that you like to see from these guys that you're going to keep over the top of some of these offenses. But I love how physical he does play and how I think he's one of the better tacklers in this class as far as the safeties are concerned. He's willing to fit the run. He's willing to come downhill and make those plays. He actually seems more excited to than a lot of these other guys, but that does kind of, you get the cons of that where, he's biting on double moves. He's biting on play action. He's not very disciplined in coverage. If he was a little bit bigger, I would have him also kind of flexing down and playing more nickel and linebacker for me. Just because I don't feel confident with him being over the top of anybody. I don't think he does a great job of, being spatially aware when routes are coming into his area and, finding those guys. But I just think he's a fun physical player that likes to fly around. He'll knock the ball out. He'll find the ball in the air, but he's a playmaker, but just not as disciplined in coverage, especially in zone coverage situations where he's most likely going to end up in the NFL.
Yep.
Okay. Next player, safety Rod Moore from Michigan. So, Bill, what do you have?
Yeah, so Rod Moore from Michigan, 6 foot, 198, 199. The biggest thing about Rod is he has an exceptional football IQ. When you watch him in the back part, this is a safety that you could have put on your green dot and call plays on your defense and not notice any significant drop off. He's like a defensive coordinator on the gridiron. He has really good fluid hip movement. His back pedal is very good, so I would feel comfortable about putting him in cornerback situations, especially in like a nickel corner situation. He has really good ball skills. He times his jumps very well. No issues there. He also is a special teams ace. This is a guy experienced on multiple special teams units. He can play as a gunner for you. He can play as a return man for you. He can do a lot of different things and add some additional value to you. He is slightly undersized, just like the other guys we talked about in the earlier episode, 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot, right around that 200-pound mark. It's a little bit undersized, especially when you talk about the big tight ends of the world. Like if you're going to pair him up against a Tyler Warren, who's 6'6", 265, what is that going to look like for you as far as defensive coverages when you're giving up 6 inches and almost 60 pounds? His tackling technique does need a little bit of refinement. A lot of times he leads with his shoulder, almost to like shoulder tackle someone rather than actually wrap them up. His man coverage skills are still in development. He often bites on sharp cuts and sometimes gives up too much separation, trusting his own abilities too much. Obviously, there is the injury concerns that he's had this season. That injury is a big thing for some people. It's not for me. It's not a history or a pattern. It's just an unlucky injury. This is a guy I would feel comfortable taking in my top 100 selections. I have a round 3 grade on him. Reminds me a lot of Eddie Jackson for what he did for the Chicago Bears, that same style of safety. Parker, what do you have on Rod Moore and what do you think about him?
Yeah, I think he'd be a perfect pairing with a guy like Billy Bowman. I think he's a very patient, athletic guy that does a great job of staying over the top, does a great job in zone. I agree with you 100% that he could very easily be a green dot at the next level. He just seems to just get it. And I feel like he's a guy that I'd be willing to spend a day 2 pick on just because I know he's going to find the field, whether that is becoming a special teams ace at the NFL level or if that's just being a leader that's able to get rotational reps throughout the year. He just seems to be, he's a football guy, right? Like he just gets it. I mean, playing for Jim Harbaugh until just recently. I mean, he's been a part of that culture, and I love his game. I love the athleticism. I wish he was more physical. I don't love his tackling ability. I do love his closing speed. I do love the length that it looks like he has. I'm not sure what his measurements are, but on film, he looks like he is a rangier guy physically. But yeah, if he could just correct some of his issues as far as being hesitant to make contact. He feels the run fast, but he's hesitant to do it. Has great acceleration, great speed. Really just an athletic upside type guy that I think is worth a day 2 pick personally.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm glad you mentioned the Harbaugh. I know it's kind of cheap to say, well, Jim Harbaugh is going to select Michigan players in the draft because he's coached them, but Rod Moore is a Jim Harbaugh, Jesse Minter type of safety, and I think he can do well pairing with Derwin James in the short term and eventually being his long-term replacement too.
So the next player, Gentry Williams from Oklahoma. So Bill, what do you have?
Yeah, so Gentry Williams from Oklahoma, 6 foot, 187. This one's going to be a cornerback special. This guy is a burner and he can fly. We're talking, this is a guy who could probably run somewhere in between 4.2 and 4.3 in a 40-yard dash and not blink. He's got very loose hips and very smooth transition. He can turn and run with some of the best wide receivers that are out there. He's got natural ball skills and good body control. His instincts are outstanding and he does really good in route recognition. He also tracks the ball well while it's in the air. The big concerns that you see is he does lack the ideal length and play strength at 187 pounds. That is light for a corner. And I've talked about it with Randall on Fridays and with Parker here on Tuesdays. How much poundage can you give up? Can you put him up against a guy like a DK Metcalf who's 6'4" and built like a brick house when you're 187 pounds? His tackling technique does need some refinement. He often dives too low instead of wrapping up. The big thing is he's got red flags for injury concerns for me. He's missed time all along his entire career, going all the way back to high school. He's missed multiple games in college. So it's going to be something his medicals will be scrutinized when we get to the next level. That being said, this is a guy, if he's on the board in round 5, just based on that speed alone, and I can put him on special teams as a kick return and then use him in the slot just sparingly, I would throw a round 5 pick for Gentry Williams. Reminds me a lot of Jamel Dean for the Buccaneers, how he's able to do a lot of that slot work. He can go on the boundary if you need him to in a pinch. If your boundary corner's out for a couple of snaps, he can take that, but he's not a full-time boundary corner guy. I think this is a guy that's going to be probably more inside as a slot in the next level, especially with that size and that speed concern. But if I'm a GM and I'm looking at Gentry Williams, his medicals are going to be a huge question mark for me. Parker, if you're looking at a corner like Gentry Williams that's a burner like this and that has some medical concerns, what do you think is going to be a good way to get him on the field per se?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the thing with these players is you have to get past what they're going to be as far as it's a smaller guy, but because of that, he's going to be more athletic, just less physical. I do see him as a really good zone player. I think he's a great playmaker. I think wow, what's going on over there, Jim?
Yes, a part of my wall just fell off. I'm good.
They did not like the take. They didn't like the take I gave at all.
I know, did not. No, but I think the best way to get him on the field is to keep him in zone situations, let him see the field. I think he does a great job of recognizing routes and again just making plays on the ball. It just is, can he stay healthy? Especially at that size, there's automatically going to be concerns with that, and he has a history to go with it. So that's just a huge red flag. How are you going to stay healthy at that size, and how are you going to stay healthy, compared to your history? I think it's just a big question. But I think he's got great potential as a gunner on special teams. I think he's got great potential as a zone help, the third and long type situations. That's the path I see for him. I don't think it's too exciting. I don't think he's going to live in the boundary. I don't think he can honestly survive consistently in the slot. I think he's more of a game plan type guy. Hope that he can make it happen on special teams.
How good is his tackling ability?
I wish he could bring the boom a little bit more. I wish he was more of a thumper. I think he does a great job of closing the distance and getting a body on a guy. Yeah. That's kind of where it stops.
Got it.
Yeah. It leaves a little bit to be desired. There's a lot of low dives and there's not a lot of wrapping up. Part of that is because he's 187 pounds. It's almost like he's just throwing all of his body weight into someone rather than wrapping him up.
So the reason that I ask is as I'm listening to a corner scouting report, I always want to know, can the corner tackle? Oh, right? Sure. Because if the corner doesn't tackle, he's not on Brandon Beane's board. So whether it's zone or man, okay, there might be a preference, right? But if the corner can't tackle, like there's just some teams they don't want them, right? That kind of thing. So
no, I agree. And there's also some teams that completely disregard tackling because their mindset is, if I have a corner that's really good in coverage and can prevent the ball from getting there, he'll never have to make a tackle. So I could see it both ways with him.
So, Bill, I remember covering Denzel Burke. I think this was on the very first podcast that we ever did together, way back in October. But we are covering Denzel Burke again. So at this point, his season has closed, or I shouldn't say it's closed, but it's coming to. We have a lot more film on him now, I think is the right way to say that.
Right.
But what do we have on Denzel Burke from Ohio State?
Yeah, so 6'1", 193 for Denzel Burke. This is a guy we covered at the very start of the Mrs. Are Relevant podcast. He was on that first episode. And going back, thinking about it, he was a really good athlete, very fluid, has the length and size. He moves well for a guy of his size, can show explosion out of breaks, good long speed to carry with receivers. He also shows really good versatility. This is a guy you can play in press coverage, zone coverage, man coverage. You can use him in a multitude of schemes, both inside and out. Really good run defender. This is a guy who's going to fill those run lanes. He throws his body around, but not in a way like Gentry Williams does. He actually throws his body, wraps up, and takes people down. The biggest negatives, and I remember very plainly, I called him Kenny Rogers in the first episode because he's a gambler. This is a guy, when the ball's in the air, he is going to gamble on it every single time. He looks for interceptions, often undercutting the routes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. He also plays with a pad level that's a little bit higher than I would like sometimes, especially when he's coming out of his back pedal and turning with receivers. But this is a guy in that top 100, right in my round 3 range. I remember the comp clearly. I called him Diet JC Horn. I'm sticking with that. He's not the full-fledged flavor JC Horn that you're going to get in Carolina. He's that diet version. If you want to watch your calories in your cornerback room, this is your guy. But, Parker, what do you have on Denzel Burke, and what do you think about him?
Yeah, I was a big fan of what Denzel Burke was doing back in 2023, but throughout this season, just kind of getting back through the tape and almost reevaluating him, I've just kind of fallen off. I'm not a huge fan of him anymore. I just feel like there's a lot of flaws in his game that I think it's all about how much you respect and appreciate, kind of that gambling mentality that Bill brought up, right? Like if you like a guy that's going to run around, try and just make plays and be a little bit more reckless on the back end, but you still get kind of that positive outcome near the end of it, almost like a Trayvon Diggs situation. I think Denzel Burke's your guy, but I just don't I feel like he lacks physicality. I don't think he's a great tackler. I think the pad level that Bill brought up kind of gets him into trouble where he can look a little clumsy in his drops, can kind of get dragged through tackles. I just feel like he needs to be a little heavier and a little more physical to consistently play cornerback. I feel like the playmaking's fun. He's definitely going to get some PBUs. He's definitely going to get some interceptions at the next level. I just wonder how consistent he's going to be because I feel like, with that play style, consistency is a big issue. That's a big thing for me as far as every position that I grade goes. If you're a consistent player, you're going to fly up the board. Even if the consistency isn't a high level, it's going to put you above guys that have that high variance play style that can play worse than you, but also play better than you. So kind of ranty to say, just not a huge fan of his game. Want to see him just be a little more physical at the end of the day, but looks good.
Parker, are you day 2 or day 3 for Denzel Burke?
I have him on the fringe. I probably wouldn't take him personally until the 4th. I don't think he'll last that long. If you're in the back half of the 3rd round, I can definitely see him going there. I personally think he'll get drafted sooner than that because I think a team's going to really like what he could bring and kind of how he projects. But I'm a big floor guy, not a big ceiling guy. I don't love projecting players. I like picking guys that I know what they're going to look like, and he just doesn't fit that mold.
Yeah, and I remember when we talked about him on the first episode, his partner in crime, Igbino's son. I actually rated Igbino's son higher than Burke. I would still stand by that today. I think Igbino's son's a better player, which says something about Burke because Igbino's son has some issues with his tape, which we can cover in a future episode. But it's pretty surprising when you think about Ohio State and how talented they are with wide receivers and wide receiver U, but then you look at the flip side of that line and cornerbacks, and it seems like there's been a little bit left to be desired, especially since the Denzel Ward days, which I know since they share the name, it's someone that gets compared to him pretty frequently. Folks, this is not Denzel Ward. This is Denzel Burke. If you're expecting Denzel Ward play, this isn't where you're going to find him.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, Bill, how high was Burke on your board before he went back to school last year?
So last year, I actually had him in the top 50 before he went back. I think him going back was the wrong decision. I think it's just damaged his stock at this point.
And Parker, how high was he for you last year?
Yeah, I think I had him in the 60s, top 75 player for me. And now, he's fallen a long ways from that now for me.
So, and the reason why I like to point that out is in our draft professor group chat, we have players going to go back to try to make it from the top 60 to the top, 30, right? In this case, the player went the opposite direction when they went back. Mm-hmm. So don't let what the 2023 grade was necessarily influence where he is on the board. Every once in a while on the simulator, somebody's going to say you have this player ranked way too low. No, I think in this case for Burke, because I have been told that I have Burke too low. Like, no, I think we have him right where he belongs, I think is the right way to put it. So that being said, we're going to pause for a quick commercial break. There are a lot of you listening and watching. Thank you. Hit that subscribe on YouTube. Hit that like on YouTube. Follow the pages on X or Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. This channel has draft content like this every day. Literally every day, there's at least one podcast. Tomorrow, I think there's going to be 3, right? So we have draft content coming at you like no other channel. Hit that subscribe, hit that like, turn on notifications. Bill, you want to tell everybody kind of who you are, how they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find my content on X at Sparks Scouting, also at Draft Detectives as well. I'm also a writer and analyst for CadesDraftRoom.com as well. So you can check out my content there. So most of it will be on X, and you can find me there. Parker, I'll turn the floor over to you. Where can the people find you?
Yeah, all my stuff, it gets posted to X as well. Like Bill said earlier, at ParkerBlake60. That's where I try and put everything, even if it's not directly something posted on X. I'll always post a link to it on my profile. So if you're looking for anything that I do, you like the content I do, just go to my page. You'll find everything there. I do also participate in content with the Right Sports Network Tuesday and Thursday mornings. We just do some kind of NFL coverage. We'll start talking about some draft stuff soon. And I just wanted to plug that because we got a pretty big draft project coming up at this offseason. I'm excited to kind of get going and work through. So, but yeah, everything's on my X account. Just hit me up there, and that's where you'll find pretty much everything I do.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Okay, so Bill, I know this is one of your guys, so tell us about Mr. Cobee Bryant.
Yes, this is my guy in this NFL draft cycle, and we always hear about, analysts and pundits. That's my guy. That's my guy. This is my guy for me. Cobee Bryant, 6 foot, 170 pounds. Don't let that weight fool you. This is a guy that has exceptional ball skills and instincts, consistently can create turnovers, fluid hip movement, quick change of direction ability. Even though he's 170 pounds, he's an aggressive tackler, is not afraid to hit somebody. He also demonstrates really good football IQ, rarely is caught out of position. Go back and watch the tape versus the Heisman winner Travis Hunter in the Kansas-Colorado game. That thing was a thing of beauty watching him go against Travis Hunter as a wide receiver. He also has special teams experience, including a touchdown on a block kick return, adds it to his overall value. Even though he is my guy, I have to be realistic as a pundit. He is undersized at 170 pounds. This is a guy, if he's going to be matched up against larger receivers in the NFL, it's going to be a concern. He may struggle due to his lighter frame, especially in press coverage because of that. His tackling technique also does need a little refinement. A lot of times he's really aggressive with his angles, even though they're the wrong angle. He's also really aggressive in trying to get to the ball. It's a see ball, get ball type of guy, but sometimes he's just got to think an extra step through it. All that being said, this is a guy that's squarely in my top 60 players right now. Reminds me a lot of Kendall Fuller with better coverage skills. So in the same way that Kendall Fuller was a smaller guy, very aggressive, had the abilities in coverage, Cobee Bryant has those. And this is a guy that I think NFL teams are going to have the question, do we play him in the slot or do you play him on the boundary because of his size? You can play him on the boundary, but you also have to be cognizant of who you're playing against. I keep going back to it just because it's an easy reference, but if I'm playing Seattle, who has DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Digba, who are bigger receivers, maybe that's a time where we put Cobee Bryant in the slot. But if we're playing some smaller wide receivers, then maybe that's sometime we can put him on the boundary. But enough of me pounding the table for Cobee Bryant. Parker, how do you feel about Mr. Cobee Bryant from Kansas?
Yeah, I've been a fan of Cobee Bryant, I feel like for the last couple of years now. I feel like I've been seeing him on and off the field. And he's always making plays. I feel like he's a guy, like if you're just casually watching, a game with Cobee Bryant in it, you're going to hear his name a couple times, whether it's a big stop, a big PBU. He's just always around the ball. I do agree with you 100%, though. I feel like it is very all or nothing as far as his mentality goes with playmaking, whether it's making a tackle, going for a PBU, just trying to scream across the field and get a punch out, whatever it might be. He's going to sell out for it, but that doesn't always mean he's going to be successful in his endeavor. So I do think it's another guy that's really boom or bust, on a play-to-play basis, which worries me personally. I do think he's got great ball skills. I think he is a really good special teamer. I think he could be another special team ace at the next level. I don't love these smaller prospects. I've already talked about that, but you always have to give props to their ability in zone coverage. I feel like these are the guys that always are great at picking apart routes and being where they need to be, and that's why you hear their name quite often. Same concerns as far as health goes. Is he going to be able to stay healthy in a physical NFL? Is he going to be able to last a full 17-game season? It could be 18-game season coming soon. Just all those similar concerns, but overall, he's just a fun player to watch. I don't know necessarily how to project him at the next level. As you talked about, he's kind of a weird makeup and build, but also style of player to fit into a defensive scheme in a consistent role. But I really hope he does make something happen and find a role, because he's just fun to have on the field. I feel like I'd like him better as a safety if he's a little longer, just because of his play style, but I feel like you have to keep him close to the box. I think he's going to end up being a slot corner. That's going to be a more game plan, rotational style corner in the NFL. But yeah, fun player. And I want to pound the table for him all day long. I just don't know where to get him on the field. He's just a guy I want in the room.
Parker, how high is he on your board?
I have him more of like a round 5 guy personally. I think he's a day 3 gem type guy where guys are going to be concerned of the size. But once you get to day 3, you're just taking swings on guys who interviewed well and guys that you just liked watching their film. He's going to fall in that bucket. So I could definitely see him going early in the 4th round, just because, again, a team's just going to fall in love with something about his profile, something about his tape, and they're just going to bring him in and see what they can do with him. But I think he's pretty solid day 3 prospect that could end up being a sleeper if he can make that size work.
Okay, so this gentleman is following the page. So Donovan McMillon, if you are listening, thank you for the follow on the Draft Professor Twitter page. So thank you. Bill, what do you have on Donovan McMillon from Pittsburgh?
Yeah, so Donovan McMillon from Pittsburgh, 6'2", 205. This guy can deliver some hits, and I mean some bone-jarring hits, and he's not afraid to do it. He's also not afraid to jump inside and jump a route to slow up the ball, especially in zone coverage. He also is a very effective blitzer, shows very well-coached technique, very good awareness. You see that in his game. The big thing I love is he has some violent hands, and I'm talking Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson violence in his hands. Very sure tackler. This is a guy you're not going to see him miss a tackle. You're going to see him wrap up a tackle. He's very good in zone coverage, has really good click and close ability. If he's sitting in a zone, he sees it, he reads it. He's a see ball, go get ball, and gets after it. He's also very aggressive in run support, has that physical mentality, willing to hit somebody. The big concerns that I see is that he gets beat over the top too often. Even though he has that ability to turn and run, he is a little bit on the slower side. He also just needs to trust himself. There were a lot of times watching his tape where I saw him panic because he felt like he was being beat and starts to get very handsy and invite pass interference calls and holding calls when he was in a great position. So I'd like to see him trust his abilities a little bit more, not be as handsy down the field. At 6'2", 205, I think he can play nickel corner. I think safety is his ultimate home. I think this is a guy with how hard he hits. I'd want to see him play safety, especially in the box, maybe even in some sub linebacker packages. I have him right at the top of round 4. I could see him sneak into day 2, round 3 with a good postseason performance, but right at the top of round 4. Kind of going to date it a little bit here with the comp, but Roy Williams from the Dallas Cowboys, how he was that kind of physical, hammer, hard-hitting safety type of guy, could really do some good things in zone coverage. His man coverage isn't the greatest, and that's exactly that. But Parker, when you're looking at a guy like Donovan McMillon, who's really good in zone coverage and he hits people hard, how would you, as an NFL GM and a defensive coaching staff, how would you plan to get him on the football field early?
These guys like this with this build that play defensive back are like the guys that would get me in trouble as a GM, because these are the guys that I fall in love with. They're violent football players. They just love to hit guys. They're that build that I like, the 6'1" plus, the 200 plus. I do think you hit the nail on the head as far as I think he needs to be a safety. I don't think he trusts his speed enough to be a boundary corner. I think or just a perimeter corner. I feel like he doesn't necessarily have the top end speed, so he's not necessarily wrong in that thinking. But with, again, the violent hands, I think he's a great press guy, great jammer. He's going to be awesome as a downhill run stopper. I think playing box safety is the way for him at the next level. I can see a team not having a hard time deciding to move him. I'd be surprised if he gets too much run as a cornerback in camp, wherever he lands. But yeah, like I said, these are the type of guys that would get me in trouble, because I just want 11 of them on my defense. Just hard guys that play hard, guys that want to come down. They want to find the ball. They want to make sure you remember them when the game's over. They want to make sure their name's in your head when you're walking off the field. Just a baller, man. He's just a fun player to watch and a guy that I just definitely want on my team. But I think the fit is a little interesting. I think he could turn into a linebacker long term. I think he'd be a really effective box safety. I expect him to weigh under 200 pounds at the combine, but I wouldn't get too hung up on that, because he's probably just going to try and lay down a better track time, because he's not going to run as fast as he wants to. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think make him a box safety and just let him be free and let him run around and hit people.
Yep.
Okay. So I have a couple questions. So as I was building the graphic, I had corner, but I heard both of you say safety. Did I put the position in wrong, or you're projecting him to safety?
I've seen both. I've seen him, some people project him to corner, some people project him to safety. Okay. I think he is a better safety just because of those speed concerns. But if I had, say, I needed to put him in a slot position to match up against someone's tight end, he could be that slot corner. But I think his 90% of the time, his snaps should come from the safety position.
I wouldn't consider him, especially a lot of people take that analysis and turn that into a nickel. He's not a nickel. He's a safety that can also play slot corner against the tight end, but he's not going to live in the nickel for you. He's either going to be, again, playing that box role, or he's going to be one-on-one matched up with the tight end. He's not a nickel corner.
Okay, so, and this is me scouting the helmet, but at the same time, Buffalo has significant ties to the Pittsburgh coaching staff. So how does he compare to Dane Jackson, or is it Alex Austin on New England? I think I have those names right. I think Austin came out 2 years ago, and Dane Jackson probably came out 5 or 6 years ago. And I think Dane Jackson's on the Panthers now. Do you guys have any, can you compare his play style to either of those corners that came out of Pittsburgh?
Yeah, so with that, Jackson a little bit. So Jackson's a guy that could play corner, and you're projecting to safety. I I don't think he's nearly as physical or as good a tackler as McMillon is. I think Jackson was a bit better in coverage. They have kind of the same foundation, but they've specialized in different things. Whereas Jackson specialized in man and zone coverage, Donovan, McMillon, we equate it to like Madden, because I'm going to be Woody Johnson as the Jets owner for a second here. Equate it to like Madden, and he put all of his skill points into run support. That's how I'd equate it there. But I think they're both very good foundationally, but I think McMillon specializes more in run support, tackling, and hard hitting, and Jackson's more of your coverage type of safety, more of your kind of center fielder type, if you will.
It's kind of like that yin and yang that typically I at least I would want on my back end. You always want like a coverage guy and then a guy that's going to be better at fitting the run, getting especially those perimeter runs. And I feel like you're perfect. Whereas Donovan's more physical than a lot of defensive backs that I've seen recently. You usually get like one or two guys in a class that's going to come down and be like, oh, this is the heavy hitter of the class. This is the physical defensive back in this class. And Donovan McMillon he's definitely a top 3, top 5 guy as far as run stopping ability and physicality goes in this class, just as far as all of the defensive backs are concerned. That's really what separates him from a lot of previous prospects that I'm familiar with. I haven't been doing this, for too long, but just a lot of the defensive backs that I struggle to grade and I always have a hard time falling in love with are just a little more, again, patient, not as physical, just kind of want to let it come to them and they'll get the stop wherever they get to stop. Whereas a guy like this is just more unique in that run stopping ability, and kind of like we talked about earlier, has more of that linebacker lean to him where he could definitely go that route if that's where a team needs him to be. If like you get him on a team like Minnesota where they're more flexible with their guys, with their players, like this is a guy that would fit perfectly in a scheme like that, in my opinion.
Yeah. So Marley Emerson, thank you very much for the comments in the chat. And anybody else watching or listening, if you have comments and you'd like to share them, we will definitely talk about them. So we appreciate the interaction. The next player that we have is Sebastian Castro from Iowa. And while that says safety, don't let the position label trick you into the position flexibility of Mr. Sebastian Castro. But Bill, what would you like to tell the audience about Sebastian Castro?
Yeah, so Jim, you hit the nail on the head there. So this is a guy, 5'11", 205, very explosive. He can close on ball carriers and get downhill in a hurry. You hit the nail on the head, versatile. This is a guy that can play press coverage, man coverage, zone coverage. He can play safety. He can play corner. He can play slot corner for you. He is a Swiss Army knife for a defensive coordinator. And this is the type of guy, when you're building out an offensive game plan, you have to know, where is Castro? Where is he going to be? He has really good zone coverage instincts. I think that's probably one of the best facets of his game, is he has these really good instincts and this good football IQ to know where the ball is going to be before it gets there. He diagnoses plays quickly. He reacts decisively. This is a guy, I know what's going on. I'm going after it, and I'm going to get after it. He is slightly undersized if you're going to play him as a safety. 5'11", 205 is a little bit undersized, like we talked about earlier. If you're going to play him as a corner, there are concerns about his speed. I've seen him being rumored and whispered to run at a 4.6, which is a little bit slower than your corners are like. So he also can be over aggressive at times, especially with play action. That is probably his Achilles heel, is in play action. He bites on the fakes too frequently and too often. And of course, we have to talk about it. His age is going to be a concern. He's going to be 25 years of age as a rookie. It's a little bit older. Yes. Can he play multiple years at the safety position? Absolutely. But it is still a cause for concern when you see safeties in this class that are 21, 22, and 23. And then you have a Castro who's 25. Is this his ceiling? Is this what we're going to see from Sebastian Castro? All in all, this is a guy right at the top of round 4, probably middle parts of round 4, right at the start of day 3. He's going to be on everybody's next up list. And that's where I'd feel comfortable taking Sebastian Castro. Reminds me a lot of Adrian Amos in terms of his play comp. This is a guy that you can use in a multitude of different ways. You can use him as a slot corner. You can use him as a nickel safety. You could use him as even a linebacker in some packages if you're going to run a 4-2-5, for example. But I think this is a guy, if you're drafting him as a GM, you have to know where you're going to use him and try to get him a finalized position there rather than kind of put him all around, because that's going to stunt his development, which is already potentially capped with how old he is as a prospect. But Parker, what do you have on Sebastian Castro, and how do you feel about him?
I think the age thing is going to be the biggest thing for him, and that's something that like I've just always had an issue buying into, like whether it's breakout age or just being an older prospect. And maybe it's something I should care more about, but I just never have, never will. I feel like a lot of people are going to take Castro, and again, another guy just that people are going to look at him and say, oh, that's just, he's going to be a fun nickel. He doesn't have great speed, doesn't have great coverage ability, but he's a good run stopper, and he's a good enough coverage guy where we can just throw him in there and he can be pretty good. And I don't think he'd be bad at that position, but I think what you both hinted at now and talked about was just the versatility, right? Like this guy is a true like back seven Swiss Army knife, in my opinion. Like he can move around, he can cover who you need him to cover. I don't know if I trust him, on the perimeter one-on-one with anybody. Just again with that speed and the issues that he's going to have with that at the next level that he already has had at the collegiate level. But a guy that I can see easily becoming one of the my guys on my list, where I just, again, fun film to watch, love his play style, very downhill, but that does come with the cons that Bill brought up as far as just the eye discipline and being more eager to action opposed to more patient, waiting for stuff to develop in front of him when he is playing over the top. That's why I don't hate him as a nickel. I think that's more of his ideal role. I think at the next level, that's where he's going to get the earliest playing time. I don't see him as a perimeter corner, and I have concerns with him at safety. So why not just slot him there? And that's where I think a lot of people are going to move him to. But again, don't forget about his versatility, and don't be surprised when you see him kind of moving around. He's no Cooper DeJean, but he's definitely a versatile guy that can get it done for you.
Cool. Okay, so we've got a few guys left. The next one is Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky. So, Bill, what do you have?
Yeah, so Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky. This is a guy 6'1", 186. We're talking about him here on hashtag Ballhawk Breakdowns because these are the ball hawks that we break down. This guy has really good knack for reading a quarterback's eyes and jumping routes very well. Even though he's 6'1", 186, he's got a very lean frame to him, but he's got that length that you look for as a cornerback. A really good football IQ. You see it when he's baiting quarterbacks to throw the ball his way and using that length against them. This is a guy, he's like your neighbor's Lamborghini. This motor never stops. It is a constant. Yeah, see, even he agrees. He thinks he's a dog out here. He's all for it. But this is a guy, a turnover machine, constantly getting those turnovers. The big weaknesses, though, is he is a little green in terms of his experience. There are limited starter reps, so I'd like to see how much more development he can get. 186 for a corner is a little bit light, and I'm not going to sit here and say it's not because I just talked about Cobee Bryant at 170. But it is a little bit light. The big notice that I've seen with that lighter weight is he gets washed out in the run game a lot. He gets pushed around pretty frequently. So I don't know necessarily if it's a weight concern, but probably more of a strength concern. His press technique does need a little bit of refinement. A lot of times he just pushes into guys rather than pushing them off of their route. And then, of course, obviously, there are injury concerns that I've heard. Some people putting up injury red flags for him. I don't have those injury red flag concerns. I don't see those concerns. Yes, he's been injured, but show me a prospect who has a clean bill of health that hasn't been nicked or dinged at some point. For me, Maxwell Hairston's right around that top 60, top 70 range, right in the rounds 2 to 3 range type of guy. Reminds me a lot of Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie when he came out, that same very lean turnover machine, ball hawk that had some things that he needs to polish to become a well-rounded corner that DRC eventually polished in his game. But Parker, how do you feel about Maxwell, and what do you see in his game?
Maxwell Hairston's a guy that I can already tell that I'm going to find a way to get to my top 50 by the time everything's all said and done. I'm a big fan of his game. I think he's one of the more technically developed guys in this class. I think there's a lot of young guys with really high-end athletic potential, that, high ceiling, where I think Hairston's going to be a guy that can come out and be a better day one contributor to your defense. I feel like he's going to be able to come out and provide something, right out of the gate, opposed to hopefully, you don't have too many mistakes from her early on. I think he's going to be a relatively clean player for a team. I just think he has a limited ceiling. That's what's going to hold his stock down. I don't think he's got the potential that some of the other guys this class do, but I think he's one of the top corners. I have him currently right now as a top 5 corner for me in this class. Just because I think he is more developed, and I think he has that floor that I love to see. I wish he was a little bit bigger, but like you talked about, he has a lean frame. I wouldn't be surprised if he could get to 200 over the course of his NFL career. I think he'd be a lot better player at that size, just because a lot of his issues, I think, are with play strength, like you brought up. I don't think it's necessarily a physicality issue. I think it's a play strength issue, and that can purely just be because he's 186 pounds or 190 pounds. So if he could break the 2s at some point in his career, I'd be a huge fan of what he's able to do, because I think he's technically developed, which you're not going to get that out of a lot of prospects as a rookie. I think that's where he's really going to jump out ahead of these guys. I think he's going to get earlier playing time than a lot of the other guys on this list, as far as just the corners in this class, just because he's ready to go, in my opinion. So I'm just a big fan of his game, definitely my guy. And like I said, I'm going to find a way to cheat him into my top 50 for sure by the end of all this.
And Parker, I don't think you're that far off. So one of the other draft professors, who's a Packers fan, is saying Hairston round 1 to Green Bay.
Yeah, I could definitely see it. And because I just think, again, especially, I think Green Bay is a great fit too, because he's a guy that they can just bring in and he can just plug a hole for them on the defensive back end, whether it's due to injury or due to need at the position. He's gonna be able to fit for you. I would be interested to see him run around as a safety, because I do think he's a better athlete than people give him credit for. And I feel like he's got great eyes on the back end as far as picking apart route and watching stuff develop again in front of him. But I just think he could really be a plug and play corner if he gets into the right system with the right coaching.
And I want to give a shout out to Ryan Sparks in the chat. So Ryan, thank you for listening. And if any of you would like to meet Ryan, I believe Ryan is going to be with us on Friday night at 9 p.m. for our very first draft roundtable. So the draft roundtable is something that we cooked up, because if you hear the conversations that we have before the podcast and after the podcast, we said, this is good content. We need to try this. So we're trying it Friday nights at 9 p.m. So after you watch Bill do his Senior Bowl coverage Friday at 7, we're going to take biology breaks, grab a beverage, and we're going to come back at 9 o'clock. And whatever draft professors choose to show up, that's who's in the room. I think this Friday we're going to specifically talk about the Bengals and the Rams roster building. They're both 2021 Super Bowl teams, and then they didn't make the playoffs, and now they're pushing for the playoffs. So what can we look at from their roster building techniques? So that's what we're doing at the Draft Roundtable this Friday. But Ryan, thanks for jumping into the chat. You are much appreciated, sir. Okay, so we have a big finish here. We're going to be finishing with Xavier and Xavier. So if you were here for Xavier Watts, he's next. But for everybody watching, and there are a lot of you, hit that subscribe, hit that like, and give us a follow on X at NFL Draft Fanatic, at Spark Scouting, at Parker Blake 60. So we appreciate you. Like we said before, we have draft content on this channel every day. Like right now, we're finishing up defensive back scouting reports. We have one more episode to cover about 10 more players. And then we're going to be talking about draft topics like no other channel. But as opposed to plugging what all those other podcasts will be, Bill, what do you want to tell us about the other Iowa safety?
Yeah, so Xavier Nwankpa is Iowa safety, 6'2", 215. That stark contrast to Sebastian Castro. This is a guy, he's got that elite athletic ability, good size, good speed, good fluid safety. Really good ball skills, very versatile. This is a guy you could have him play single high safety, two high safety, come down in the box. You could put him as a slot corner. You could even throw him on the boundary corner if you needed to, because he's got the athletic ability to do it. He also shows a really good tackling ability, very easily wrapping people up. Not a lot of missed tackles from him. Really good football IQ. He is a durable guy. This is a guy, to my knowledge, has not missed a single game for the Iowa Hawkeyes, which is saying something, because when you're playing in the Big Ten, it gets pretty nasty up there in the winter, especially when they start hard hitting. For Xavier, though, the Nwankpa, the big thing that he still need to work on is his man coverage technique. The quick, twitchy receivers, the Worthies and the Bonds of the world, sometimes give him fits. He has the athletic ability to stay with them. It's just like we talked about with Donovan. He doesn't trust that he can stay with them, but he does have that ability. I would like to see him add some upper body strength. Even though he's 6'2", 215, he's a little bit light on the upper body frame. His arms are a little bit lanky, so I'd like to see him bulk up in the weight room a little bit. In addition to that, I would like to see him improve his angles and run support. A lot of times he takes just improper angles or just takes a bad angle. But this is a guy I have firmly at the top of round 3, right in that top 75 guys for me. Reminds me a lot of Jordan Poyer in that same type of safety. Very athletic type of guy that can do a lot of different things for you. Doesn't necessarily have a special home. He's not really necessarily your run thumper. He can do it. He's not necessarily your coverage guy, but he can do it. He's just a really good ball player that's very athletic, and that's how I see Xavier Nwankpa. Parker, how do you see him from Iowa?
Yeah, this is again 6'2", 215. I'm automatically excited when I pulled up your profile on your school website. But then I'll get into the film, and like you said, he's not going to like blow you out of the water with either side of his game, run support or coverage, but he does both well enough where you can consider him a jack of all trades, and that's great to have at the safety position, because while he might not be positionally versatile on film because he just kind of gets left in that safety role, they like letting him just sit back there over the top and find things to do, find work, and he is great at doing so. I think that's what really gets me excited about his potential at the next level. And I really, 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 really hope that I can get him on my shadow team, because I need another safety. And I think he just, again, fits that mold well. He's got the size that I love. He's got the playmaking ability, isn't crazy. He's not, flying across the field and knocking balls out and making all these crazy, jump off the screen plays, but he's a consistent force. You always have to be aware of where he is. He's able to be moved around the field if you have a matchup that you're worried about as a defense. I just feel like he's one of the guys that is going to get significant playing time as a rookie if he goes to the right system, obviously. But I think he deserves that. I think he's deserving of an opportunity to become a starter as a rookie, because I feel like he's got a really high ceiling and a high floor to match that. So I don't think he's a day one guy. I personally have him as a third round, fourth round type guy, where it's more, do you have a spot for him? And he's a safety. How much do we value the safety? And both of those things are going to slide him down the list a little bit, I think. But I think he's going to be a guy a lot of people look back on and say, wow, how did he go in whatever round, round 3, round 4? I just big fan.
Cool. Well, we have our big finish. Xavier Watts from Notre Dame. So, Bill.
Yeah, so let me dive into Xavier Watts, especially as someone who lives in Indiana, just 2 hours south of South Bend and Notre Dame. This is a guy that I've gotten to know very well, and I'm going to get very hot takey here after the scouting report, but let's dive in first. Xavier Watts, 6'1", 206. This is a guy, when we talk about ball hawk breakdowns, this is a ball hawk mentality. He always wants to be around the ball, exceptional instincts and coverage, very ball hawk magnet, almost always around an interception. Very physical tackler who brings a linebacker's mentality. So this is a guy in the back end of your defense. He can bring that linebacker's mentality and want to come down in the run and just hit somebody as hard as he can. Has a very good football IQ, which shows in his transition. He actually is converted from the offense to the defense at the safety position. So you see that in his football IQ. He's got solid athleticism. This is a guy that's probably going to run high 4.4, 4.48, 4.49 in the 40-yard dash. So he's got that speed necessary to cover the deep third of the field for you. The big thing that I love, he has the clutch gene. This is a guy, big game performances. You're going to see it from him. Just last week in the Indiana game, you saw him interception that rattled Curtis Rourke early and they never recovered. So that's what you're going to see from Xavier Watts. The big thing, though, I would like to see him improve his consistency in tackling. A lot of times he's too aggressive. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of times where he just shoulder tackles to want to hit somebody. It's that linebacker mentality that I'd like to see him shake a little bit. He also does need to refine his technique in man coverage. The more polished route runners in the NFL are going to be able to use cuts and breaks to get away from him because he doesn't have that top flight athleticism. But all of that being said, it's time to get into hot take territory. Xavier Watts is my safety one of this NFL draft class, and I have a first round grade on him. My comp for him is Ronnie Hickman if he were on steroids. I'm not saying Ronnie Hickman takes steroids. I'm saying Xavier Watts is Ronnie Hickman on steroids. This is a guy, I could see him in that first round. I could see him going to a team like Miami who needs a safety. Bryant Sparks hit the nail on the head. I could see him in Cincinnati. Selfishly, I'd love to see him in Cleveland as well. But this is a guy, he's my safety one. He gives you all the production that you'd want from that deep third of the field. But enough about me gushing about Xavier Watts. Parker, how do you feel about the Notre Dame standout?
Yeah, you and I were talking about him on X just during that playoff game last week. Just flying around making plays. His name's always getting called. You said it was hot takey, but I have Xavier Watts pushing. He's like my 2A right now. He's 2A, 2B. Any given day, those two guys for me are flipping spots. I personally lean Watts. It's just my grading system likes the other guy a little bit better, but I like Watts personally. I think he's not a Malachi Starks for me, who's my safety one, but he's pretty much everything just shy of that. I think he does a great job. Again, playing that center field position, getting to where he needs to be, having that closing speed, has great ball skills, is a solid tackler. I'm not as concerned with the stickiness in coverage necessarily in a man situation because I like him playing that center fielder position. I like him being back over the top of the offense and just finding the ball in the air. That's what I think he majors in. I think he's a very consistent zone player. And again, just the size that I like to see, another guy that probably hits the combine in the 190s, but plays in the 210s. But overall, just a big fan of Watts, and I would be surprised if he makes it out of the first round personally.
Yep. Yeah. And you see it statistically, 13 interceptions in the last 2 seasons.
It's a playmaker, man.
It's a playmaker. It's a ball hawk. It's the reason we talk about him on #ballhawk breakdowns, because he is that. Jim, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so I like the Watts round 1 talk. This is a great way to end the podcast. So, Ryan, if you are listening, let me ask you this. Would you take him for the Bengals 18th overall in the draft? And yeah, that's me saying Cincinnati's not going to make the playoffs, but let's save that part of the discussion for Friday. Would you take him Cincinnati 18th overall? Because, and while I and the rest of us are waiting for Ryan's possible chime into the chat, there's a lot of people that want Watts in round 2, right? So like Clint Ghost, draft professor, wants him to Atlanta in round 2, right? And then there's a whole bunch of other people like Cincinnati, round 2, of course, right? Everybody wants him round 2. But what I'm thinking is that with the lack of first round grades this year, and with what the back end of round 1 looks like, I'm having a hard time seeing him get by Kansas City or Buffalo.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Right. So, and I realized, like Parker, I also realized that you're a Bengals fan. Parker, would you take Watts 18th overall?
I mean, he's 14th on my board. I think the interesting part of that conversation is with the Bengals. I wish I was going to be there Friday. I'm not able to make it Friday. I'm kind of bummed, but you're getting me all excited talking about it now. But I think the Bengals and Bengals fans especially, just feel like they've invested too much into their defensive back room, and they'd rather see results than more players get added. That's where I've gotten a lot of flack, even, saying Malachi Starks to Cincinnati in the first round. So I think I personally, if it's me, I'm taking both, especially in the second round. But if they're at 18, that's 2 top 15 players for me. If they make it to 18, I think you grab them unless you got a better player available. If you got a better BPA choice, is where I think the Bengals need to be this year. But I think Xavier Watts could definitely be that, and I would not be mad about that selection at all.
So we're having a team building discussion on Thursdays. This is our relevant podcast. So actually, Ryan Dale will be in that team building discussion from Bengals and Brews. So this is a Jim Wickens team building theory. The only teams that should be taking a safety in round 1 are teams that are playoff teams, where you've got a pretty good roster. Because from a team building standpoint, I could list probably 6 positions that are more important than safety. So from Cincinnati's standpoint, you got to have your defensive line and your edge straightened out. And if there's somebody on the board that's going to make your team better on the defensive line, that's a more important position than safety for 2 reasons. It's just a more important position. And this is a moderately deep safety class. Skip Xavier Watts round 1 or 2. Get Nwankpa round 4. Type thinking. And while there's a drop-off between the 2 players, from a team building standpoint, you have to address the premium positions first. That's my hot take for New Year's Eve.
So I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate and piggyback off of that. I think NFL teams are going to see the production from him as a ball hawk safety and not necessarily care about positional value. Because if I was an NFL GM, I'm going to look, if I'm a team like Indianapolis or Miami or even New Orleans who have that need at safety, I don't necessarily care that he's a safety. I care that he gets turnovers for my defense and he's shown a pattern of it. That's why I like him over Starks, because Starks has the athleticism, but it doesn't just translate. Whereas if I'm looking, if I'm sitting there, I'm on the board at 10 and I'm at New Orleans, I want a star of my defense that I know can give the ball back to my offense, even though he's a safety. Positional value flies out the window when I have a player. And I know Newt and I, if he's watching, Newt and I have talked about positional value as well. It's a little bit overrated in my opinion. I'd rather have football guys than positional players, if that makes sense, because I want to see that production. So I think for me, his ceiling is 10th overall right now to New Orleans, but I think he would probably end up Indianapolis, even in Arizona, maybe Miami. I think his absolute floor, you hit it on the head, Jim. I don't think there's any way he gets out of round 1 with just his production and his track record of production in college.
Yeah, and I guess my counter point to that, Bill, is the Giants took, and I'm trying to remember, Tyler Nubin. I want to make sure I got his first name correct. Tyler Nubin early in round 2 last year. But from a team building theory standpoint, the Giants skipped drafting an offensive lineman in a very offensive line rich draft class. And now the Giants offensive line is in shambles, but yet they have Nubin, right? Like, you have to take care of premium positions. And like one of the examples I'll also use is I'm a Bills fan for anybody that doesn't know. And Buffalo does not have Hyder Poyer this year. We have Hamlin and Rapp. And one of the things we're talking about with Buffalo is you want safeties with a floor. We like the floor of Hamlin. We like the floor of Rapp. They're not Xavier Watts. Neither of which is, you're not going to confuse either of them for a ball hawk. But from just making the defense function, you need safeties that aren't going to give up the big play. Mm-hmm. And that's what we get. Now, we're not necessarily getting the turnovers from those guys. Rapp is forcing a couple of fumbles, but that's not the same as being a ball hawk. But just from a roster building theory standpoint, I would always say that, you need your lines built. You need your quarterback. You need your receivers and corners. And then you do your running backs, safeties, and linebackers. But that's, again, a personal opinion. And as it says on my tag, I'm a moderator with opinions. I always have opinions.
Yeah. So I'll counter your point to wrap it up and hit things home. I would typically agree with you in that, spending a first round pick on a safety is probably a little unrealistic, but we've talked about it. A lot of us on this pod, a lot of the draft professors have talked about it. This is a class where there's probably maybe 14 to 15 true first round guys. And a lot of them are not at the premium position, quarterback, offensive line. You could argue edge. You could argue wide receiver. The depth of this class is better than the top end talent. So if I get to that 14th or 15th selection and those top guys that are bona fide first rounders are gone, and now I'm looking at a guy who may be a second round pick, a second round selection versus an Xavier Watts ball hawk, I'm more apt to take the ball hawk. But also something that you and I have talked about, Jim, if I'm a GM like a Buffalo, because we'll use Brandon Bean for example, or I'm a new GM, say the Titans, for example, I'll just throw them out. It's a little bit high, but say the Titans have a new GM in Carthen or a GM on the hot seat, like in Indianapolis, for example, am I going to want to spend that first round pick on a non-premium position because I may not be here to see the fruitions of my labor? Or am I going to take a somewhat safer position that's at a lower talent? So that's the conversation that you have to have with Xavier Watts is the team that we've built around him currently good enough to maximize his skill set? And if it's not, do I have enough job security to go to my owner and say, hey, we're going to take this safety who's gotten 13 interceptions in the last 2 years. By the way, he plays safety, not a quarterback, left tackle, edge rusher, things like that. So being able to justify it there as well.
Yeah. Anything to add, Parker?
I think, I could talk team building all day. That's why I'm trying to stay out of it. I don't want to get on a rant here. Make us think another hour long. But
Right.
my general team building philosophy is that you should be address needs in free agency. You gotta buy your needs because you've already put yourself in a position throughout your drafting history to end up having a need in that spot. Whether it's turnover, whether it's just missing on players or just not addressing a position, I think you got to spend money to fix needs because that's where you're getting that, quote unquote guaranteed, production or value of guys that have been in the league. There's those veterans that what they're going to give you, to an extent. And you always want to posture yourself to just take the best player on your board at your pick in whatever round it might be. And that's where I think the positional value conversation in the draft is, I think, a little overblown because there's so much, the quarterback hype and the trade value you can get for those top picks and all this stuff that, overcomplicates things. And really as a team, you could just sit back and just say, hey, I'm going to take the best guy available on my board at my draft position and be okay with that. Now, obviously, if you have a full defensive back room, you're not going to want to just go pick up a Watts because you hopefully have a guy that's already fulfilling that role. But again, I just think, especially, going back to the Bengals conversation, if you're sitting there and you have a guy like Watts available to you at an 18 or 19 position, I don't see why you wouldn't take him unless there's a defensive lineman available. I think it's for them specifically. Yeah, you want to prioritize the defensive line. They have that need. They should address that in free agency, but maybe they do, maybe they don't. It's D-line and then DB for me personally for the Bengals. So if it's a 19, you got safety 1, 2, or 3, depending on how your board looks. Why not take him? So
makes sense. Okay, well, we have been going for 75 minutes. There are a lot of you watching. Thank you. Happy New Year. So, and by the way, here's a little trick. If you have an iPhone, text somebody Happy New Year. You're welcome. There are some animations, and I was texting a draft professor Happy New Year about 5 minutes before the podcast started, and I got a bunch of fireworks. So if you have an iPhone, text all your friends and family Happy New Year. For everybody listening, on behalf of Parker, Bill, myself, everybody at the Draft Professor. We will see you on a podcast tomorrow. Happy New Year. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for watching this episode of the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on YouTube, X, and Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. If you have a moment, try using some of the Draft Professor mock draft functionality, including a first-round challenge, a second-round challenge, rank players, and draft a team. Thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on our daily draft podcast tomorrow.